The hearing room pulsed with fluorescent light, cold and humming. Cameras clicked like anxious insects as Mike Johnson leaned into the microphone, his tone sharp enough to slice through the air. "Ms. Crockett," he began, papers trembling in his hand, "some of us earned our seats through work, not television appearances." The insults slid out smooth, rehearsed, the kind of jab designed for headlines. A ripple ran through the room, journalists shifting forward, aides pretending to type notes but really just listening. The gavel hung motionless, a wooden witness to arrogance. Johnson's words filled the chamber with the scent of superiority, thick and stale. He smirked, waiting for applause that never came. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. The lights caught her profile, still, deliberate, calm. For a moment, even the background chatter from the press pool faltered. Her eyes tracked Johnson with the patience of someone who had seen this act before, who had outlasted worse storms. He tried again, louder this time, as if the force of his own voice could make the insult true. "Maybe if you focused less on sound bites and more on substance." That's when the silence hit. Sudden, heavy, the kind that makes even microphones hum in discomfort. Crockett lifted her chin, slow and unbothered. One blink, long and measured. Her lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite defiance, something more dangerous, understanding. Around her, aides froze mid-motion. A reporter whispered, "Oh, she's about to end him." The narrator's voice slides in, steady, almost cinematic. In that split second, the balance of power shifted, and the world didn't even realize it yet. Johnson's smirk faltered. He had expected outrage, maybe a defensive speech. What he saw instead was composure so sharp it made his own temper look childish. The camera zoomed in. Millions would later pause this very frame, replaying it in disbelief. Crockett leaned toward the mic, voice calm, clear, carrying the weight of someone who refused to bow. "Congressman, I've never needed your validation to do my job." Gasps rippled, the kind that travel faster than sound. Even Johnson looked momentarily lost, blinking like a man who'd walked into his own trap. And as the silence reclaimed the room once more, the narrator whispered the promise that would define the rest of the story. What she said next would rewrite the rules of political confrontation. The story didn't begin in that hearing room. It had been building for months, an invisible storm gathering behind the marble columns of Congress. The country had grown tense, tired, and divided. Each committee hearing had turned into a miniature battlefield, raised voices, clipped retorts, viral sound bites that replaced actual debate. What once was meant to serve the people had begun serving algorithms instead. And in the middle of it all stood Jasmine Crockett. To her supporters, she was a rare force, lawyer, advocate, and truth-teller in a place where truth had become negotiable. She spoke with clarity, not volume, and in an age of chaos, calm had become rebellion. Clips of her questioning witnesses, her unflinching tone, her refusal to let condescension slide, they flooded social media feeds. To some, she was a symbol of accountability. To others, a threat that needed to be contained. For Mike Johnson, she was both an inconvenience and a reminder. Once viewed as the rising star of his party, he'd built his influence on control, over tone, over narrative, over the people who didn't fight back. But Crockett did fight back. Not with insults, but with facts that cut deeper. Every time she went viral, his authority looked smaller. Behind closed doors, aides whispered that Johnson couldn't stand being outshined, that every headline with her name on it was salt in a wound he pretended didn't exist. The narrator's voice lowers, steady and deliberate. He thought this was just another exchange. But for her, it was a chance to remind the country what leadership looks like. Cut to flashes of recent hearings, Johnson interrupting colleagues, pounding the table for effect, Crockett sitting still, eyes focused, waiting for him to finish before speaking only once, clearly, precisely, and winning the room without raising her voice. This wasn't rivalry, it was contrast in motion, arrogance disguised as authority, meeting calm precision grounded in truth. By the time the latest hearing came around, the tension had already written its own script. Johnson entered with a mission to humble her, to remind her who supposedly ran the show. His supporters expected dominance. His critics expected drama. But what they got was something else entirely. The narrator continues, "In politics, power often wears a mask. It smiles while it undermines, it preaches respect while practicing the opposite. But every mask slips eventually, and this one was about to crumble live on camera." As the footage rolls, the sound fades except for the tapping of Johnson's pen, the prelude to his attack. He leaned forward that day believing he could shake her confidence. But what he didn't understand was that Crockett's composure wasn't just strategy, it was survival. She'd built her career facing skepticism, walking into rooms where she had to earn respect twice, once as a woman, again as a woman of color. And so when he came for her resume, her legitimacy, her worth, he wasn't just attacking her. He was echoing every voice that had ever tried to diminish someone who didn't fit the mold. The narrator's tone tightens. He thought he was exposing her, but all he did was reveal himself. Across the country, millions would soon replay that confrontation, each person seeing a reflection of their own quiet endurance in her calm gaze. The scene fades back to the moment before impact. The paper in his hand, the flicker in his eyes, the hush that filled the air before history turned. And when he finally crossed the line, she didn't flinch. She fired back.
For years, Mike Johnson had perfected a certain kind of performance, the measured cadence, the confident stare, the gavel striking wood like punctuation to his own authority. To the cameras, he was the embodiment of composure, the self-styled moral center of a Congress constantly at war with itself. He carried himself as though every word he spoke was a lesson, every ruling an act of divine order. And for a time, people believed it. He rose quickly, fueled by rhetoric about values and virtue. He spoke of decency, of family, of faith, as though he were the final keeper of a nation's conscience. Cable networks played his speeches on loop. Conservative outlets crowned him the steady hand America needed. His voice carried a pastor's rhythm, his smile the polish of a man who'd learned how to make conviction sound like compassion. But beneath the sermons lay something colder. In private committee hearings, his tone changed. Less preacher, more prosecutor. He dismissed interruptions with a glare, called colleagues by their first names as if they were students, and cut off dissent with the gavel before ideas could take root. For every word he preached about unity, he delivered 10 more about obedience. He didn't debate, he dominated. The narrator's tone turns reflective, steady. For years, he built his power on the sound of his own certainty. Then came the cracks. Clips began to surface, not from grand speeches, but from smaller moments caught on open mics. A sarcastic sigh when a woman challenged his point. A smirk when a younger colleague corrected his numbers. a muttered comment under his breath that went viral within hours. That's not how this place used to run. Twitter lit up. Journalists dissected his temper. Late-night hosts turned his glares into punchlines. One analyst wrote, "Johnson's control only works when no one else in the room believes they have any." Another added, "He doesn't debate opponents, he narrates them into silence." And yet, even as his image began to fray, Johnson doubled down. He leaned into his moralism, turned defensiveness into theater. When critics called him arrogant, he called himself steadfast. When journalists exposed contradictions, he spoke of media persecution. It was a script as old as power itself, when losing control redefined the story. Cinematic flashes, his hand gripping the gavel tighter, jaw locked during hearings, the faint tremor the cameras barely caught. The narrator continues. The illusion of authority is fragile. The more it's tested, the louder it must shout. In one viral moment, Johnson interrupted a witness mid-sentence, slamming his papers for effect. The clip made millions of views not because of what he said, but because of what followed. A long, weary sigh from the woman he'd cut off. A sigh that said everything words couldn't. That woman wasn't Jasmine Crockett, not yet, but she was one of many who tasted the same condescension, the same reflexive dismissal that Johnson mistook for leadership. He'd built a fortress out of formality, wrapped arrogance in scripture, and convinced himself it was strength. Every gavel strike became less about order and more about ego. Every raised brow was armor against accountability. He called it discipline. The world began to see it as fear. The narrator's tone sharpens. Power that demands silence isn't strength, it's insecurity dressed in authority's suit. Political commentators started to whisper, "He's losing the room. He doesn't realize people aren't intimidated anymore." On panels and podcasts, his old allies tried to defend him, but the cracks in their voices betrayed what they knew. Control is a drug that stops working the moment others stop believing in it. And then came Jasmine Crockett, newer, unbothered, unafraid of his hierarchy. She didn't play his game. She changed it. Her rise wasn't built on bluster, but on substance that traveled faster than his speeches. Her popularity online was an irritant he couldn't swat away, a mirror he couldn't look into without seeing the reflection of his own obsolescence. The narrator slows. For a man who lived on certainty, she was chaos. Not the chaos of noise, but of truth. As the hearings went on, their paths collided more often. Each exchange chipped away at his composure. Where he brought thunder, she brought calm. Where he tried to corner her with rules, she used reason to walk right through them. The cameras loved it. The public noticed. And Johnson, who once commanded rooms, began to chase relevance instead of commanding it. Each critique from the press felt sharper, each interruption more desperate. He wasn't losing arguments, he was losing the illusion that he couldn't. The narrator's voice lowers to a quiet hum. The higher he held that gavel, the heavier it became. As the day of their confrontation approached, Johnson convinced himself it would be his redemption, one last chance to reassert dominance, to remind the world of who he was. He studied her past statements, prepared his lines, rehearsed his indignation. He mistook rehearsal for readiness. And when he finally walked into that hearing room, gripping the gavel like a scepter, cameras glinting under the ceiling lights, he believed he would silence her the way he had silenced so many before. He didn't know that history doesn't repeat, it corrects. The narrator pauses, a breath before the turn. But the moment he underestimated her, his legacy began to unravel. Before the lights, before the cameras, before Congress, Jasmine Crockett stood in courtrooms that smelled like sweat, fear, and hope. She wasn't born into the spotlight, she earned it. One case, one cross-examination, one sleepless night at a time. The narrator's tone is low, reverent. Before she ever sat in Congress, she stood in courtrooms defending people who had no voice. Cut to grainy footage, a young Crockett walking into a county courthouse, legal pad in hand, hair pulled back, eyes unflinching. The bailiff calls the room to order. Her client, a single mother accused of petty theft, looks terrified. Jasmine leans over, whispers something that makes the woman smile for the first time all morning. That's who she was even then, calm in chaos, clarity in confusion. Every frame breathes humility and grit. She wasn't a politician in those days. She was a fighter, a believer in the kind of justice that doesn't come easy or cheap. When prosecutors barked, she didn't flinch. When judges scolded, she didn't retreat. She learned early that power isn't about volume, it's about conviction. The narration builds. She was steel sharpened by fire. Every attack made her stronger. Every dismissal made her louder. Every insult taught her how to stand taller. Cinematic flashback, campaign trail footage, a dusty Texas road, handshakes at gas stations, porch conversations with voters who'd stopped believing in politics. Crockett, still smiling, still listening. When donors said she didn't have a chance, she said, "I don't need a chance, I just need a microphone." She turned a folding chair and a borrowed camera into a movement. Her first viral clip wasn't rehearsed, it was raw truth. She looked straight into a local news camera and said, "If I don't fight for them, who will?" That clip spread across social media like wildfire, not because it was polished, but because it was real. Journalists took notice. Supporters shared her speeches with captions like, "Finally, someone who talks like us. She's not scared, and that scares them." Her rise wasn't meteoric, it was earned. Every insult hurled at her turned into fuel. Every headline questioning her tone only amplified her message. Crockett walking through crowds of protesters, head high, reading late-night briefing notes under a single desk lamp, standing outside courthouses surrounded by cameras, unshaken, hugging a young girl after a rally, whispering, "You can do this too." The narrator's voice slows. She learned that the most dangerous kind of woman is the one who refuses to break, because once she realizes her power, there's no putting her back in a box. In Congress, that fire didn't dim, it evolved. The halls of Capitol Hill were colder, quieter, the kind of place where smiles are strategic and silence is currency. Many thought she'd conform, trade conviction for diplomacy. They were wrong. When hearings grew tense, Crockett didn't shout over her opponents. She waited for them to run out of words. Her power wasn't in aggression, it was in composure. Cinematic B-roll. Split screen of Crockett sitting calmly while others yell, her eyes steady, her pen unmoved. Analysts called her unflappable. Supporters called her fearless. Her opponents? They called her dangerous. And maybe she was, but not in the way they meant. She was dangerous because she'd already survived worse. When you've built your career defending the unheard, there's nothing left for them to take from you. Clips flash, her questioning a witness, her fiery rebuttals, her calm dismantling of misleading narratives. Each time she speaks, the air shifts. She doesn't perform, she commands. A viral montage plays. A CNN panelist saying, "Crockett's the only one who can throw a punch without raising her voice." A TikTok overlay of her most iconic line, "If standing for truth makes me loud, then turn up the volume." Tweets flooding in, "She's the voice we've been waiting for." Narrator, in an era of noise, she became signal. By now, her reputation had grown beyond politics. She became a symbol, not of a party, but of presence. She stood for every woman who'd been interrupted, every worker who'd been—
The room hums with static tension. Cameras blinking, reporters poised, 1,000 unseen eyes waiting for something to happen. You can almost hear the electricity in the air. The chairman's voice echoes faintly, procedural, distant. Then Mike Johnson leans forward, that tight-lipped smirk returning like a reflex. His tone slices through the air. "Representative Crockett, perhaps if you spent less time on social media and more time understanding the issues." The gavel strikes once. Bang. He doesn't stop. "We wouldn't have to keep revisiting the same points. I'm not sure you fully grasp how these committees operate." The murmurs rise. A few heads turn, some roll their eyes. The aides shift in their seats. The press gallery perks up. They've seen enough hearings to know when one is about to ignite. Crockett doesn't move. No blink, no sigh, just that calm, unreadable stare. The narrator, low, deliberate. He raised his voice. She raised the standard. Another gavel strike, louder. "Order," someone says, but Johnson's too far in, fueled by the sound of his own authority. He flips through papers dramatically, the performance of certainty. "You see, Representative, experience matters here. Leadership isn't a TikTok trend. It's earned through discipline, not dramatics." The subtext drips like poison, condescension masquerading as professionalism. He leans back, satisfied with his delivery, as though the point has been made. But across the room, there's movement. Cameras shift, lenses focus. Someone senses it, the moment before the moment. Crockett adjusts her mic, a small gesture, deliberate. Her fingertips rest lightly on the table. "Mr. Johnson, are you finished?" The words land like a slow drumbeat. Johnson's smirk falters for half a second. "I'm simply," she continues, unbothered, "because if you are, I'd like to respond to the part where you questioned my experience." There's that pause, the kind that pulls every molecule of air out of the room. The narrator's voice cuts in, cinematic and tight. The gavel couldn't silence her. The condescension couldn't touch her. She wasn't just defending herself. She was defending every woman who's ever been told to wait her turn. The audio layers build, clicking cameras, faint whispers, the rustle of papers. Each sound feels amplified, alive. Crockett straightens. Her voice carries, not loud, but sharp with precision. "Let's be clear. My experience isn't limited to these walls. Before Congress, I practiced law. I stood in courtrooms where the stakes weren't sound bites. They were people's lives. So when you question my understanding of leadership, understand this. I've seen it, I've lived it, and I've fought for it." The air shifts. You can feel the balance tilt. Johnson interrupts again. "No one's questioning your service, Representative." She doesn't let him reclaim the rhythm. "You just did." A collective murmur ripples through the room. The gavel slams again, but it's too late. Control has already left his side of the table. The narrator tightens the frame. In politics, power is rarely taken, it's transferred. And in that moment, the current moved. Close-up. Johnson's jaw tightens. His smirk curdles. He tries to laugh it off, leaning into the microphone with that performative calm. "Representative, maybe you're just too emotional about this." The words hang there. You can almost hear the disbelief before the outrage hits. Too emotional? Reporters exchange looks. The crowd murmurs. It's the oldest trick in the book, and everyone knows it. But Crockett doesn't react. Not with anger, not even with visible frustration. She just breathes. One deep,
Quiet breath. The narrator whispers, "She could have shouted. She could have walked out." But instead, she prepared to end him with truth. Camera flash, the clock ticks once. Crockett leans forward, her tone lowering, almost surgical. "Mr. Johnson, if defending integrity makes me emotional, then I hope every leader feels exactly what I feel right now, because this country could use a little emotion for what's right." A beat of silence. Then she stops speaking. Not because she's done, but because she knows she doesn't need to say another word. The entire room frozen. No shuffling, no murmurs, not even the press moves. It's as if everyone's collectively holding their breath. The narrator's final line comes slow, measured, heavy with implication. He thought the exchange was over, but he had no idea. Her next 30 seconds would stop him, cold. Cut to black. Sound of a single heartbeat. Then silence. The chamber feels suspended, soundless, airless, like time itself has stepped back to watch. All that exists is the hum of cameras, the faint tick of a clock, and Jasmine Crockett's steady breathing. She looks at him, not with anger, not even with defiance, but with a kind of serene disbelief, as if she's finally understood that this isn't just about her. It's about something larger. The narrator's voice drops to a whisper. In a world addicted to noise, her silence was the loudest sound in the room. And then she begins. Her tone isn't raised. It's controlled, every syllable deliberate, every pause like punctuation written by history itself. "You can question my resume all you want," she says, eyes locked on Johnson, "but you can't question my results." A ripple passes through the room, small at first, then visible. Heads lift, pens freeze midair. Cut to slow-motion reaction shots. A reporter blinking twice, a staffer glancing toward another aide, an intern mouthing, "Wow." Even the gavel, half raised, doesn't strike. Crockett continues, voice smooth, unhurried. "You talk about experience, Mr. Johnson, but let's talk about what experience means. Experience isn't sitting in a chair long enough to call yourself a leader. Experience is standing in the fire when no one else will. Experience is showing up when it's hard, when it's unpopular, when it costs you something." Her words land like drumbeats, steady, echoing, impossible to ignore. "You say I'm driven by media attention," she continues, leaning forward slightly. "If that were true, I'd be saying what's easy. But I'm not here for easy. I'm here for right." The room remains frozen. The air feels heavier now, charged, alive. Narrator. She didn't shout. She didn't crumble. She dismantled him, piece by piece, with truth. Cut to Johnson. His face has shifted, the practiced arrogance replaced with something unfamiliar. He opens his mouth, searching for words, but finds none. Crockett keeps going. "I didn't come here to make friends in high places. I came here to make space for the people who've been kept out of them. So when you talk about credentials, remember, mine aren't written in privilege. They're written in persistence." A quiet gasp from somewhere in the back. Someone whispers, "She's ending him." Crockett pauses, lets the silence breathe, the kind of silence that demands reflection. Then she adds gently but firmly, "Leadership isn't about who talks the longest. It's about who stands the tallest when they're told to sit down." Every camera lens seems to lean in closer. Even the light feels different, warmer, sharper, almost reverent. Narrator. She didn't shout. She didn't crumble. She dismantled him, piece by piece, with truth. Heartbeat fades in. Slow, steady. Boom. 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 Her voice overlays the rhythm, each line hitting like a pulse. I've seen communities that Washington forgot.
I've seen families working 3 jobs just to survive, and I've seen what happens when power forgets its purpose. Her hand rests flat on the table. That's why I'm here. Not because it's easy, because it's necessary. The interjects. In that chamber, one woman's composure became a country's answer to arrogance. Johnson shifts in his chair, the faintest twitch in his jaw. The smirk that carried him through 100 hearings has vanished. For the first time, he looks human, fallible. Crockett keeps going. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to agree with me. But you'll remember that I showed up and I spoke truth when silence would have been safer. A pause, then the closing strike. So, Mr. Johnson, if your definition of experience is comfort, then you're right. I don't have it. What I have is conviction, and that's what changes things. The final sentence hangs in the air like a verdict. Silence. No coughs. No shuffling. Even the air conditioners seem to hold their breath. The narrator returns, voice rich with gravitas. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a debate. It was a declaration that dignity doesn't need permission, and truth doesn't ask for the floor. Cut to reaction montage. A journalist blinking back tears, scribbling furiously. A young staffer pressing her hand to her heart. Members across the aisle shifting uncomfortably, realizing this was no longer a political moment. It was a moral one. The sound design layers. The heartbeat continues, then begins to blend with a faint echo of applause from somewhere distant, imagined, almost ethereal. Narrator. Some moments are born for headlines. Others are born for history. This was both. The camera zooms in slowly on Crockett's face. Calm, centered, unbroken. The same expression she wore at the start of the hearing, but now it means something different. Now it means victory without venom. She glances down at her papers, straightens them, and leans back. Not a word more. She knows she said everything that needed to be said, and nothing that didn't. The narrator's tone becomes reflective, almost poetic. There's a reason the world stopped scrolling that day, because somewhere between his arrogance and her restraint, America saw itself, divided, defiant, searching for grace. Visual montage. Social media erupts. Tweets flood in. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the bar. This is how you check power with class. Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in composure. Clips from cable news, analysts debating, hashtags trending, a late-night host replaying the moment with the line, "You can't question my results." That's going on a t-shirt. The narrator overlays it all, voice building like a crescendo. It wasn't just her words. It was her poise, her precision, her power in stillness. In a system built on spectacle, she reminded everyone that truth doesn't need to shout. Cut to visual symbolism. Crockett leaving the hearing room, cameras flashing, her heels echoing in the hallway. Behind her, Johnson remains seated, eyes down, papers untouched. The narrator interjects. The man who thought he was in control of the narrative had just been written out of it. The sound of her footsteps fades into music, solemn but victorious. In that rhythm, the story transforms from confrontation to revelation. 30 seconds, the narrator concludes. She turned a personal attack into a public awakening. She showed what happens when conviction meets composure, and arrogance finally meets its match. The music swells, a single violin note climbing into an orchestral rise. The screen fades to black. A final line appears in silence. What she said inside those walls.
It started as a clip, just 30 seconds of quiet dominance in a crowded hearing room. But by the time the sun rose over Washington the next morning, it had become a digital earthquake. The narrator's tone hums with rising energy. By dawn, the moment wasn't confined to C-SPAN anymore. It was everywhere, on phones, on feeds, in the collective bloodstream of a country hungry for something real. Cut to montage. The scroll of a million screens lighting up. Tweets racing across timelines. TikTok edits looping her line, "You can't question my results." Late-night hosts splicing her calm stare with laugh tracks and audience cheers. Headlines flashing like fireworks. Jasmine Crockett just ended Mike Johnson on live TV. Congresswoman delivers a masterclass in grace under fire. The moment that silenced the room and the internet. Every platform hums with the same current: validation, admiration, vindication. The narrator slows, voice layered with awe. By dawn, the moment wasn't confined to C-SPAN anymore. It was everywhere, on phones, on feeds, in the collective bloodstream of a country hungry for something real. Cut to imagined audience reactions, quick, human, heartfelt. A teacher in Chicago tweets, "That's how you handle bullies. Calm, sharp, undeniable." A college student reposts the clip with the caption, "She said what every woman in every meeting wishes she could say." A mother of two comments, "She didn't lose her cool. She owned the moment." The voices overlap, forming a digital chorus. Each one adds to the wave. Cable networks replay the exchange in slow motion, anchors leaning forward with practiced excitement. CNN's Chiron, Crockett's calm turns tables. Fox frames it differently. Congresswoman's emotional response sparks debate. But regardless of the spin, everyone's talking. The narrator weaves through it all, rhythmic and cinematic. Some called it power, some called it poise, but across the country, millions simply called it justice. Cut to visual montage. Crowds gathering in coffee shops, phones tilted sideways, students debating the clip in classrooms, office workers sneaking a rewatch during lunch, evening news panels dissecting every micro-expression. One commentator says, "She didn't just answer him, she rewrote the script for how you deal with arrogance in real time." The clip becomes meme gold, spliced into pop songs, turned into motivational edits, captioned over slow-motion walk-ins and cinematic scores. A popular influencer posts a remix titled, "Unbothered Energy, Jasmine Edition." Within hours, it hits 1 million views. The narrator, "The internet had seen 1,000 political showdowns, but none like this, because this one wasn't about shouting louder, it was about standing taller." Mike Johnson's office releases a statement, defensive, clinical. He claims the exchange was mischaracterized, that he was merely emphasizing procedural experience. But the tone reads brittle, the damage already done. Clips of his stammering responses go viral too, but for a different reason. The internet doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive weakness pretending to be strength. The narrator leans in. For years, he had controlled the room with volume. But now, even his silence was being replayed, analyzed, memed, mocked. The authority he'd spent a lifetime performing was unraveling in real time. Cut to split-screen visuals. Crockett walking confidently through the Capitol corridor, surrounded by cameras, while Johnson avoids reporters, offering tight smiles and shorter answers. Behind Crockett, supporters cheer her name. A journalist shouts, "Did you plan that response?" She smiles, replying softly, "No, I just told the truth." That soundbite spreads like wildfire. A viral TikTok edit syncs her line to music, the caption flashing, "Truth doesn't need rehearsal." The narrator continues, "It wasn't just politics anymore. It was symbolism, composure in an age of chaos, clarity in a time of noise." Newspapers publish think pieces. The Atlantic, Jasmine Crockett and the Art of Staying Unshaken. Washington Post, what her response tells us about a generation's patience running thin. Essence, a black woman's composure just redefined strength in politics. Editorial boards, activists, influencers all converge on one sentiment. She didn't just win the argument, she elevated the standard. The montage continues. Hashtags trend, hashtag Crockett calm, hashtag grace in power, hashtag results speak. Artists create digital portraits of her mid-sentence. A viral tweet reads, "This clip is going in textbooks one day." A late-night comedian jokes, "Mike Johnson wanted to school her. Turns out, she was the professor." The tone shifts from frenzy to reflection. The narrator softens. Some moments in politics are designed for applause. Others are designed for memory. This was both, because somewhere beneath the noise and the memes, people saw something they'd been missing: authenticity. Visuals slow down. Crockett on screen, back in her office, scrolling through messages. One from a young girl reads, "You made me believe I can speak up too." Another from a retired civil rights lawyer, "You didn't raise your voice, you raised the standard." Crockett smiles, unreadable but content. The narrator, in a time when outrage is currency, she reminded the nation that grace still has value. Footage of rallies, podcasts, and campus discussions fade together. The tone becomes philosophical. She wasn't the loudest voice, she was the clearest, and in clarity, the country found its mirror. The camera pulls back, the Capitol dome glowing under twilight. The faint echo of her line lingers, "You can't question my results." The narrator concludes the section with quiet intensity. Beyond the headlines and the hashtags, the truth remained simple. One moment of composure had exposed an entire culture of arrogance. And the world wasn't just watching, it was learning. A pause. Then the sound of typing, another headline being written. But beyond the noise, beyond the viral glory, a deeper truth was beginning to emerge. Cut to silence, the hum of reflection. The story isn't over yet.
The screen fades from the frenzy of headlines to stillness. Soft piano notes, muted city lights, the echo of Crockett's words lingering like an anthem. Narrator, measured, reflective. In every institution built on ego, there comes a moment when truth walks in wearing calm. The image of the hearing room returns, not loud this time, but reverent. The gavel, the murmurs, the flash of cameras, now symbols of something larger. What began as a debate became a revelation. The narrator continues. That 30-second exchange was never just about two people. It was about a country exhausted by noise, desperate for grace. Visual montage. Americans from every walk of life. A teacher replaying the clip between classes. A mechanic watching it on his lunch break. A young girl whispering the words to herself in front of a mirror. Each one sees something different, yet the same. Strength without shouting. Dignity without dominance. Narrator. For years, we've mistaken volume for leadership, anger for conviction. But in that hearing, one woman reminded us that real power is quiet, steady, earned. Crockett's composure becomes a metaphor, a mirror reflecting America's moral fatigue. Cut to symbolic imagery. A candle flickering in a storm, a flag rippling in slow motion, a courtroom door closing as the echo fades. She didn't fight fire with fire, she used water, and in doing so, revealed the smoke. Narrator. Arrogance was silenced by grace, and for once we saw what humility can do when it's armed with truth. Camera pans across still frames, Crockett standing firm, colleagues watching, the stunned look on Johnson's face. The soundscape is rich but subdued, a single piano chord holding tension, fading into resolve. It wasn't a performance, it was a principle. She didn't just win an argument, she reminded us why dignity still matters. Because in a world that rewards outrage, dignity feels almost rebellious, but rebellion has always been the birthplace of change. Visual transitions, real Americans again, this time united by feeling rather than opinion. A black father telling his daughter, "See that? That's how you handle disrespect." A college student posting, We need more Jasmines in politics. A grandmother smiling softly, whispering, "That's strength." The narration rises with emotion, measured, poetic. In her calm, America found its conscience. In her words, its reminder that respect isn't weakness, it's the foundation of everything worth building. Cut to slow-motion visuals, the Capitol at dusk, Crockett walking through marble halls, camera lights chasing her silhouette, her hand brushing the edge of a stack of notes, the quiet detail of preparation that power rarely acknowledges. The narrator continues, "History doesn't always announce itself with applause. Sometimes it begins in silence, in a breath taken before the storm, in a voice that refuses to tremble." Symbolic montage. Civil rights marches in black and white dissolve into modern crowds holding phones high. Generations connected not by slogans, but by poise. When arrogance met grace, grace didn't flinch. The narration turns personal, almost confessional. We've grown addicted to outrage, to the illusion that anger equals strength. But what Crockett showed was something quieter, harder, restraint, the discipline to let truth do the talking. The music swells, strings and light percussion joining the piano. Camera pans up, light breaking through the clouds over the Capitol dome. Maybe that's the lesson America needed, that the real revolution isn't in shouting louder, it's in standing taller. That courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply says, "You can't question my results." Each word echoes, overlapping with faint snippets of Crockett's actual voice, layered under the score like a heartbeat. Final montage. Families watching together at dinner, students quoting her line in classrooms, headlines fading into silhouettes of everyday people. Narrator, soft, closing. In her stillness, we saw strength. In her restraint, we saw justice. And in her dignity,
The music softens, a slow, reverent pulse beneath the closing frame. Jasmine Crockett's calm face lingers on screen, the light catching her expression just enough to remind you this wasn't about politics. It was about power reclaimed through composure. If you've ever been underestimated, this moment was for you. The camera pans across faces, young, old, diverse, each one watching the same clip, each one seeing a reflection of their own fight to be heard. Those 30 seconds didn't just destroy arrogance, they exposed how fragile ego becomes in the presence of truth. And if that struck something in you, if it reminded you of every time you stayed calm when someone tried to silence you, then you're already part of this story. The visuals shift. A collage of viewers typing comments, sharing clips, forwarding the video, conversations unfolding in living rooms and classrooms. Because silence built the problem, and your voice can fix it. Each word lands like a promise, not a plea. When you comment, when you share, when you subscribe, you're not just helping a channel, you're helping shape the conversation. You're proving that dignity still resonates louder than noise. The screen fades to Crockett's face one last time, still, unshaken, illuminated. Dignity wins. The chapter she started, it belongs to you now. Speak it forward. The music swells gently, a note of quiet triumph, then fades to silence.